Hey there, everybody. My name is Tad Reeves, and I'm joined here by Raf Winterpacht. And we have decided to do a little recording here on and a discussion on how to choose a next generation digital experience platform. And we're going to go in a little bit to what would go into that. Well, first of all, what even is a DXP or a digital experience platform? How does that differ from a traditional content management system? Why would you want to choose this? What would you want to think of? Why is this an important discussion? And give you some food for thought for what is really arguably one of the most important technology purchases that I think that a company can make because of how many things it touches. So I guess some introductions in order. Raf, I'll let you go first. You can talk to who you are and what you do.
Sure. The name is Raf Winterpacht. I've been working in the industry for a number of years now. First days as a software developer back in the late 90s, actually. And working with content management systems since then, and obviously they've evolved over the years. And one of the things that is really interesting here too is that we've mentioned here, what do you do with your corporate site that's running on this 10-year-old legacy CMS, right? Well, I was probably there at that 10-year-ago mark, implementing CMS, so it's going to be interesting to talk about that. But recently also acquired a couple of certifications, so became a Adobe Sites practitioner and also Adobe Analytics. So
oh, cool.
Recertified in those certifications just recently, so it feels good to have those under my belt now.
Nice.
Yeah.
Nice. I'm gonna have to go in that direction. Tad Reeves here. I've been working in enterprise infrastructure and related fields for a while. I think I did my first content management type job in 2002, setting up a SharePoint site. No, 2001. It was a SharePoint site back then. But I've done all kinds of different CMSs, and then for the last 12 years or so, I've been in Adobe land, or before that, the Day CQ land, which is a big content management system, and then now a digital experience platform. And my specialty or my focus area really has been how that gear interacts with all the other gear that you've got, deployment processes, DevOps, all that sort of thing. Yeah. And here we go. Let's talk about this.
Awesome.
So in terms of like the goal for this talk, I guess what we had kind of bulleted out as to stuff that we want to go over is if you said you got a company, and for the most part we're talking about larger companies, mid to large size companies, and you've got a content management system, some sort of a big piece of gear that runs your main corporate website or your main internal website, intranet type of a thing, and you're looking at either replacing it or whether or not you got to replace it. What would you look at? You've heard everything's going to the cloud, everything is all AI and it writes it all for you, and you need something new because your stuff is old. So what would be the things that you would think of, and what should you consider when you're going to do that? So I guess you wanted to just talk about a little bit of the state of the market there. We're not going to talk about specific products and try to sell you something. So both Raf and I have been in the Adobe world for a while, and our main focus is on Adobe Experience Manager and its role in the company. But we're going to try to stay platform agnostic right now and stay away from that of just like what should you consider if all the options were on the table. If you just want to say, good, I've got something totally new that I'm going to do. And let's just say you're doing something like you're going to launch a new brand, and you're going to roll off the big corporate website. So many things are on the table. What should you consider when going for something new?
Well, I think also in addition to that, there's organizations who are experiencing those kinds of things that I think a lot of us are now taking for granted, right? I mean, obviously, marketing groups, they want to take advantage of these new features and capabilities of these big DXPs, but I think also there's those things that we're, again, taking for granted, right? So I remember the days of having to be up on a Friday night into Saturday morning doing a deployment. It takes hours. We would sometimes meet at the office. Everybody would bring in these snacks, and we would have all this junk food on the table, and we would go through the deployment process, right? we're not really doing that anymore. But I
Yeah.
think there are still some organizations that are experiencing those kinds of pain points, right? These
Yep.
long deployment cycles. What about when a particular server goes down and they have to, restore that from a backup that's, a couple of days old, and it sets them back. Those kinds of things we kind of take for granted nowadays that aren't really a problem. But there are still some organizations that are experiencing that. So I think that's something worth just mentioning there too. That people are still sort of carrying that burden of a legacy system.
Totally. And I think that some of those burdens come down to artificial limitations that you may have put on what is the what's the product that you're going to put forward to your customers, whether it's internal or external customers. And a lot of times that's based on how much gear you could have afforded. Like whether or not you did something like, some crazy video thing that you really wanted to do, you just didn't have enough servers to do it, maybe because you were hosting it all in the data center. You just didn't have enough storage. So good, we're not going to do video right now. We're not going to because we just don't have room to store all that. Well, if you're freed from those shackles, then would you still decide that, or would you do more, or do you just not have a team that's capable of producing the content that you would store in that sort of way, or what? So it's good to think of, I think.
Yeah.
Um, and I guess that so the other thing too is that you and I have had these conversations too of like of when somebody says, well, good, so this one that you guys are working with, is it the best? And then I mean, having those conversations, I think it's a lot of it's really similar to like when somebody says, well, what's the best truck? Like for what? Like or what's the best thing to I'm getting I live in Chicago. What's the best? What should I get? I mean, your answer might be, dude, you need an e-bike. You don't need a car. Like you should just like you don't even have to park it then. Like that's what you need. Maybe based on the requirements or fine, an e-bike's not going to tow my horse trailer. So good. So maybe it's a different set of requirements. But um, it's such a diverse market right now with so many super cool systems that can do so many things that I think it bears a lot of discussion and breaking apart what the problem is.
Yeah, yeah. And obviously, what somebody's using now as well kind of will, inform what they need to go to, right? Migration obviously is a really huge aspect for, especially a large organization where they're having, multiple websites, multiple entities that are stored in the CMS. Is there a migration effort that has to happen for that? Is it an entirely new system? What does that look like?
Right.
Can they retire old content? Are they keeping it around just for compliance reasons or regulatory reasons, right?
Exactly.
When I worked at a bank a number of years ago, one of the requirements that they had is that they had to show what a website looked like to a customer at a given point in time. So you can imagine what that version history might have looked like, given those kinds of requirements.
Oh my goodness.
Build that system that supported that for, like I said, those kinds of requirements. But nowadays, I think we have, again, one of those things that we take for granted. We have all this version history. We have all these different tools that you can use to bring back systems and bring back content the way it looked on a particular day. It's pretty amazing.
Yeah. So before we like dive hard into requirements, so how would you define, I guess, the difference between what is a content management system and then what is a digital experience platform? And once I got to get it off my chest that I really do loathe the term experience on this because I feel like it's one of these meaningless pieces of marketing jargon. But how would you define the difference between a content management system and a digital experience platform?
Yeah, and I think a content management system or a CMS is sort of an older kind of legacy term that we've been throwing around for a number of years now. And really, what a content management system was or is still is a set of tools that lets somebody who's non-technical make changes to a particular website or an experience, if you want to call it that, without involving IT. So that was sort of the
Right.
goal of a content management system. Now that we have digital experience platforms, it's not only encompassing that content management system, but now you can also manage content or experiences for various channels, or actually all of your channels. So
Right.
you can manage things like pieces of content that might be delivered on a kiosk or print or some other
Right.
channel that isn't necessarily a website. So that's kind of how I see a DXP versus a CMS. It's sort of
Right.
an evolved platform that's all encompassing for your content.
That's right. And these days too, like in the early days of a CMS, like you could probably say that 95, like if take something like, take the state of CMSs in 2007, right? Before the proliferation of smartphones. Almost everybody who's accessing your content is doing it on a desktop or a laptop. So they're on a big rectangular screen, and they're interacting it with a keyboard and a mouse.
At the office.
At the office, yeah, either at the office or at home. And so yeah, the people who are putting stuff into it are all doing it at the office. They're not doing that at home. And then fast forward to today, and you've got so many different lenses that are looking in at your content, from a mobile app to mobile websites, tablets, desktop at work versus desktop at home. Then you've got all the different personas. You've got a logged in experience versus a not logged in experience. You've got a returning customer. You've got all these ways of tracking that stuff in real time without having the person's identity already. So that's a huge difference between just managing, the About Us page and then the pretty picture of your corporate headquarters. It's a lot deeper set of things that you have to be able to manage.
Right. And I think something else that's evolved too over the years is that back in the early days of content management systems, at least the one that I used to work in, which was an enrollment team site, it was really hard to build a true preview of what content might look like
Right.
for a user, right? I think nowadays they've gotten much better, so they have a true preview, like you have an actual way to see the content as if it were actually live on a site, which is kind of nice. So
Right.
nice evolve there as well.
Right. And then you have this other idea too of an experience that you create, like, and by experience, you're talking about something like a way of interacting with data that you have. Like let's just say you take something like, take something that everybody's used to, like take Zillow, right? Like where you've got the view of, here are the properties in an area, here are the ones that are for sale, for rent, or recently sold. Here's how I'm going to pop up and drill into it and see what schools are nearby and so forth. That flow is going to be the same. They've obviously made it basically the same on mobile versus desktop. So if you go into it, you're going in with a common set of expectations of how you're going to interact with this just ridiculous volume of data that Zillow is then presenting through to you, and being able to manage those other smaller experiences from place to place. Like you got you got a restaurant locator or something like that. You design a restaurant locator, and you've got that a lens for interacting with that data, and you want that to be on more than one place. And you got to make it touch and tablet friendly or something like that, and stick it someplace else without having to recreate the entire page and reprogram it from scratch.
Right.
All right. So I think we've got a little bit of the difference between a content management system and an experience platform, because in this case, something that would enable one to be able to manage all those different experiences and not just being a place. I mean, a lot of times too, and we've seen this again and again, that companies will buy a digital experience platform and they're still just using it as a CMS. They're really just putting pictures and text into it and making a bunch of pages.
Yeah.
They're not really using any features that weren't already out in 2010.
Yeah.
I guess, unfortunately, yeah, go ahead.
I was going to say something else that we can probably talk a little bit more about too is, when we're talking about content, what exactly are we referring to? Because that's something that's important too, right? We usually think of as text, right?
Right.
But then you also have imagery. So we have digital assets. That's obviously made its way into becoming, sort of a main component in some of these digital experience platforms as well. But what about other things like the smarts behind it? What about analytics? What about things like search engine optimization? What about personalized experiences? What do those all look like? All those smarts behind it. I think, that's sort of another sort of piece that we can define into what is content, what's being stored in these massive repositories as well.
That's right. And then when you get into that, then you go right into the slippery slope of how is all of that then generated? Is that all generated just by people who are manually uploading things, or are some of those pages not only are they automatically generated from things like a schema, like a taxonomy, where you add some images and some text, and they can automatically build a page of like, here's here's recipes that contain, cheesy French fries or something like that. Uh, it, but more importantly, something that would be analytics driven based on. So we got people who are coming in and they're first time visitors from Thailand. Then this is what we're going to show them because analytics wise, this is what has performed better, and you can go and have pages that are dynamically rearranged based on that, or A/B tested based on that.
Right, right. I think the example that I've always seen in terms of that too is, if somebody lives in a wintry sort of environment, you're not going to show them beachwear necessarily, right?
Right.
So, those kinds of personalized experiences I think are important to call out there too, but they've become even more personalized now, especially with things like developing content that is used for things like real-time CDP. That's
Right.
that's a big one there too. That's been around for a little while now too. But I think there are a lot of people that want to get on that bandwagon as well,
That's right.
delivering that truly one-to-one personalized content.
That's right, and have a much faster feedback loop than what people are used to. Because from all of us that have been used to being digitally marketed to for a while, a lot of times you used to feedback loops of like, I said I don't want to be on this mailing list a week and a half ago, and I'm still getting email, sort of a thing. Whereas, or you're still getting advertised for a product that you bought 2 weeks ago. Like I don't need to be told to buy this product; I already bought it. But more stuff of how I could use it, or a service that I could use to get more out of it, or something like that. That's what I should be being marketed to. But driving all those campaigns and messaging that's on the website and so forth, and tying that all together is it's deep.
Yep.
So okay, so I guess one way that I want to kind of go about this then is let's take an example or more than one example, like of two different kind of use cases um, of where a company might be and where they might want to go with this, or what they might want to think about, because almost nobody's. So you take a big content management system or a big experience platform like AEM or Sitecore or Equia or any one of these ones, right? Like, and they're going to try to sell you on good. You should build this thing on Drupal. It is the problem with that is it's not like buying, a new Tesla or something like that. It's not just a drop-in sort of a thing where you can just say, good, I'm going to take this piece of software and uninstall the old one and install the new one and put some things in it and I'm up, kind of a thing. Because of, I aside from maybe finance systems in big companies, I don't know of anything that generally ties into more individual parts of the company on average. On your average big corporation, your content management system that's driving the website has its fingers in ERP systems, in ordering, in your sales pipeline, and all these different things. And there's a lot more thought that needs to kind of go into it, whether it's you're just trying to upgrade maybe, or you're thinking of spinning off a brand and doing something totally brand new or something like that, or ejecting yourself out of corporate data centers, and that gives you an opportunity to go and consider something new.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So there's sort of that aspect of it. When you're deciding on which one to go with. So it's the size of the organization. In some cases, what I've seen, at least in my experience, is that you have a small group of people, a small group of either marketers, or they're in a particular group and they want to use this shiny new tool. They go out and buy it, they license it, but they don't talk with all the other groups. So the other groups catch wind of this and they're like, oh, that's really cool. I want to start using that as well. How do we get on that platform? So I think one of the things about, and this is maybe not necessarily something that's inevitable, but it does happen. So if that's the case, you want to look at something that's very scalable, right? You want to look at something that can sort of grow with those kinds of evolutions in an organization, where you have that kind of growth, really.
Right. Yeah, indeed. So, all right, good. So let's take a couple different use cases, because then we can take some of these questions and things that you should ask yourself. Or if you were going to do, let's just say you're going to do a project to really say, good, we're going to rip out what we've got right now, or we're going to replace what we've got right now, and we're going to get something new. How would you then go and structure that? So let's take one example of something similar to a company that shall remain nameless. But how about you get something like a major like a manufacturing company, somebody who's got like one of these big F500 type of a company, relatively big footprint, international footprint, international website. So they're already translated. They're in multiple languages. They do some e-commerce, not maybe a ton. It's not Amazon.com or something like that, but they do some e-commerce on their site. But they've got a global audience. They've got they've already got a uh, let's see, they've got and they've got it tied into all different things in their company, right? So you take something like that, and they're on, let's just say they're on premise, right? Let's just say they're in corporate data centers right now. So they're thinking about moving to the cloud. So that gives them a pretty broad bunch of things that they should consider, right?
Yep.
Um,
So they have a lot of products, right? They're a manufacturing company, so they have a lot of
yeah,
products.
yeah,
They have a lot of information about those products, right?
hmm
So that product comes down to things like its metadata, things like its imagery, things like its description. Like there's all these different attributes that are associated with that particular piece of content, let's just say.
right,
So the sheer volume of it is something to consider. And how does that change over time? So I think if they're looking at choosing a digital experience platform, I think that they want to try to do it or try to look at a system in such a way that that content can carry over various versions of it. It can be upgraded easy enough. So that's one thing to look at as well, right? I don't think they want to go through a painful upgrade every other year either. I think that's something that these bigger organizations have experienced. So that's one thing I would look at in a DXP as well is
right.
how future proofed is my content if I go into this particular system.
Right. Well, so let's just talk about that right there too, because this comes into both, I guess, sometimes the disparity with how a content management system or DXP gets sold, and what ends up happening, on year three of that thing being in use. And a lot of times there is a wide disparity of how did it really shake out, because um, okay, so let's just say you got a company. Let's just say they're on an old team site, or let's just say some old .NET nuke, or something old, right? Something that they definitely want to not be on anymore, right? A SharePoint site from 2006, something that they're so fine. They're going to get all the way off of it. They're going onto a completely new platform. That means that they're going to be training up some internal developers. So let's just say they hire an architect who's going to be who's going to be the main guy on this new system, right? Let's say they hire a lead dev, two lead devs, or something like that. That's not the estimation of effort of the project. The project is going to probably be 8 developers working for 6 months, working to go and change this thing over and slurp out all the old content and so forth. What happens when they go live, though, and those contracted, hired guns roll off? Are they going to be able to keep this thing up? Are they going to be able to maintain it? Do they have the firepower to be able to make this thing continue to be upgraded and so forth? Is it going to be a continuing, parade of vendors that they end up having to go through to be able to keep this thing going? I mean, this is something that you and I have seen, where somebody goes in with like AM's a beast like that, and it's notoriously difficult to hire for. So they get a vendor to come in, do it, and maybe some parts of it are awesome, some parts of it not so awesome, and then they're left holding the ball. And maybe one architect who also is forced to be a manager is not going to be able to keep that up.
Right. And that's one thing that the company has to do is to hire those kinds of resources in order to maintain that system and look at potentially upgrading it and keeping it alive, right? But
Right.
then you have the case where that system is either end of life, and now they're forced. Sometimes an organization would be forced into a new system because there's no longer support for it. They just can't keep
Right.
it alive anymore. So that's obviously a challenge that you want to try to avoid. Not that you always have to be on the bleeding edge of technology necessarily, but I think you want to try to stay updated as much as you can. And a system that allows you to do that, I think, is key.
Yep. But I think that if you dive into this idea of personnel first, of just like of that being a first concern of when deciding what kind of a platform you get. I mean, let's just say you've got a really strong front end unit. You've got a bunch of strong front end devs. You have the ability to hire more front end devs. You've got a lot of good designers. You've got a lot of good UX type people, and maybe you don't have a lot of, you have turnover in terms of back end devs. If you've got that and the ability to have a bunch of guys who can stand up, something on Angular or something like that, and they can make a big crazy front end that is abstracted from whatever the back end is that's holding all of the content, the number of systems that you could use in that are relatively wide in terms of like if you're just going to run the whole thing headlessly, you could go with one of these very headless first type systems that where you don't need to be all in on one of these big platforms and only have all your .NET developers or Java developers or something like that who are going to be you're going to have to rely on for every single thing that you want to do in the future.
That's right. That's right. And that's a really nice separation of concerns there as well, right? Because you can have these backends which are sort of agnostic from that rendering or however that's being displayed, which is using a different front end sort of infrastructure, which is kind of nice. So all they really are concerned with is that that content is coming, that it's performant, that it's correct, right? That they can aggregate it
Right.
appropriately. So that I think, like I said, is a nice separation of concerns.
Yep. But then not every company is like that. I mean, I just gave an example of a theoretical company. I unfortunately have only, I think, seen one or two of those, like in the last 5 years, where you have a really, really strong front end crew like that could take on a completely new CMS without too much problem. So, okay, here are the new backend APIs. Let's roll with it. I've only seen one or two that even could do something like that if they wanted to.
Right, right. Well, I guess then the other side of that is the whole monolithic
Yep.
platforms, right? So things like AEM, where they're the whole package, right? So they do the
Right.
rendering, they do all the content management, authoring kinds of activities. They have various integrations. So they're doing everything, right? But then I think what they've been also sort of selling over the years is that they can also be available as a hybrid sort of a CMS. So meaning that they can do head optional, right?
Right.
So if you have those kinds of resources, but you still have AEM, either because you inherited it or you've been using it for a number of years, you just want to sort of replace what that whole front end architecture looks like. You could do it, right? Because it is available
Right.
via
Right.
APIs. So it's kind of nice when you have a system that can do that as well.
Got to tell you, that's one of the things that I'm very interested in. That's coming up for Adobe Summit. Is we got some sessions on the project that was called Helix for a while, and now is called Franklin.
Right.
It's just this whole like where you can have your content all in a bunch of Google Docs, and it basically doesn't then just comes up and renders headlessly and blazingly fast. And I'm really super interested in where that's going. There's a couple pretty big companies that are publicly out there as one of them, which you and I have seen a good bit, that is going to have their stuff in Franklin. So, but to have the option of either, yeah, you could do it all headlessly, or in some cases, like you've got one of these manufacturing companies or something like that, right? They don't have an app. There's no app that people are going to. So if you said, hey, it'll look great in all of your different applications, almost everybody's looking at this corporate site on their desktop. Some people are looking at it on mobile, but fine. There's you don't get anywhere with really, putting all this work into abstracting it into front end and back end and having that separation of concerns is more work that way. And so selling only on everything should be headless is not really the case. If you wanted to build something on an existing set of themes and components, like in the AM world, you've got core components where you can just say, good, I want a drop down. I want a breadcrumb here. I want a menu here. I want some, faceted search list this way. Then you've got a lot of that pre-built, and you don't have to reinvent the wheel to be able to make your website and have somebody who's going to do all this crazy front end work for you, because it doesn't get you anywhere.
Right, right. And the hope there is that if you have resources that are specialized in that front end technology, you think that they're not starting from, having to reinvent the wheel, right? Hopefully, they have some,
Right.
frameworks and sort of set of tools that will help them, hit the ground running when they're getting content rendered.
Indeed. Indeed. Well, one thing I want to talk about too, while we still have some time in this too, is so we've talked a bit about content. When you're choosing one of these platforms too, you can't really get out of also talking about asset management because so much of making an experience is dealing with all of your assets. And as we've seen when going and doing evaluations of different platforms that you could go to, in some cases maybe it's great at rendering things headlessly, but if you have to then go and purchase and run and implement a completely different solution for managing your hundreds of thousands of graphics and product images and the experience like fragments of things and videos for internal and external consumption, and where those videos going to be utilized and so forth. I mean that is its own really inextricable question to be able to have that, like for each one of these platforms. What is there, like what do you look for then in an asset management platform? What are some things that you would then go and say, good, what do we need to be looking at?
Yeah. Well, scalability obviously is one huge thing because if you have that kind of volume, right? I think also when you have something like a digital asset management system, I would want something that also has some smarts built into it. So
Yeah.
I'm a photographer outside of work, right? And when I do something like upload some of my images, it's kind of nice to see that these tags are automatically set on it, that I don't have to go in and
Right.
actually tag it with, bridge and architecture and Chicago skyline and that kind of thing. So
Yep.
I like to see those kinds of smarts built into it. I also like to see that depending on where that particular asset is to be delivered, the system is smart enough to know what particular rendition should be delivered. So it's optimized for a particular channel. That's another thing I would like to see too. And then just it being organized, right? I think a lot of organizations struggle with, how they can organize that content in this dam, right? So you're looking at the central repository, but are a lot of people uploading the same images? Are there ways that the asset management tool can dedupe some of this for me? Because there's
Right.
multiple versions of this particular, your company logo, for example. So it being able to help me in those sorts of areas is really nice too. And then where is this asset being used, right? So over the years, it may be included in a number of different website pages. So now I'm going to swap it out, but what other sites am I going to impact if I do that, right?
Right.
So giving me that kind of ability to see what those insights are into that asset and how it's being used is pretty important too as a marketing person.
That's right. Or is it still being used?
Yeah.
Because if you've got something I used to do work for a major footwear company, and you've got things that change around all the time, and you've got assets that are still out there in use, on some little landing page or something like that you forgot about. Is last year's stuff still out there, or should it be rotated through with something new?
Right. And also, is that content being delivered in the most optimized way, right?
Yes.
I don't want to be on my phone and pull up this 4 megabyte image multiple times every time I, navigate to the next page, right? So, smart ways of it doing some caching and having, use of CDNs and such, I think is pretty important too. So it being able to work well across from beginning to end in the experiences, I think also very key.
I'll tell you a story about that. So there was one company that I was working for that was rolling into mainland China, and they were trying to debug how why are some of these pages taking so long to load, and they were getting reports from people on the ground that some of these pages, they're just regular product pages, just silly thing where it's supposed to be an image, a couple thumbnails, and then just the Chrome around the page, and that's it. So it shouldn't be anything big. These pages are taking like 3 minutes to load in mainland China, or in many places in Asia. They were taking just minutes to load, whereas in the U.S. they were taking like 8 seconds. So it's like, what's the problem here? And some of these problems came down to really large images that you couldn't, when you're on the desktop, you didn't see the fact that yes, you're just pulling in an image that is cached, and you're not seeing these bandwidth problems. Whereas, you're on the other side of the world, you don't realize that that image that was a 4 meg image, or in some cases a 20 meg image. These are like you could put it on a billboard, and they were using it and pulling it in as the product shot. And in some cases, even the thumbnail
Wow.
was like a 20 meg JPEG or a ping that was being pulled in. So to optimize all that delivery, and also obviously managing all that manually is so labor intensive. If you are having to individually cut all those images, you just want to just have a system that is ensuring that the images are delivered the right size, are optimized. You basically just end up with a perfect lighthouse score sort of a thing when you're all done.
Right, right. And the optimization of the assets is one thing, and I think that a system that can also differentiate something like an image from a video, from a document, from whatever other kind of asset you might be storing there too. I don't know where some of these various digital experience platforms are as far as a maturity of how it can help you organize some of that content, but I think in a lot
Right,
of cases you still have to lay out what that folder structure needs to look like and who has
right,
access to those various areas, because I don't think that can automatically happen. So no matter what, you're going to have a certain level of content architecture that's going to be
right.
involved in that implementation.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right. So another end of this, and this is, I guess, the kind of the exciting unknown end of it is how much is AI gonna feed into this? Because AI, obviously, it makes for amazing presentations. It makes for awesome keynotes. It makes for these things that make CMOs go, "Oh, I have to buy this shiny new object because obviously I can fire half of my staff now because AI is going to do it," or something like that, right? When a lot of that ends up being hyperbole, but still, there are some really legitimate things that are implemented already and implemented well. They're not just future stuff, of robots taking over the world, sort of a thing. They're already implemented, and they're already really a thing that people should be considering can be done in a both a digital asset platform, but also an experience management platform.
Yeah, and there's even sort of different personas that I think should be interested in this as well, right? So on
Right.
the marketing side, I would be very interested in AI doing something like automatically creating some product pages that have various levels of information about that particular product, for example, right?
Mhm.
Content writing itself by use of AI. But then
Right.
also on the development side, so now I'm a developer, and can I tell AI to whip up a function that's going to do this particular thing? I'm going to send it these parameters, and I expect this back as a result, and it's going to
Yep.
write that code for me, right? Sort of different ways
Yep.
that you can use this AI potentially. I think it's
Right.
pretty exciting. It's scary in some ways, like you said. Does the CMO all of a sudden fire a bunch of people because he doesn't need them anymore because we have AI?
Right.
But I think what we know about AI, it can be good, obviously, but then there's also the ways that it can be misused. I think as well. For
I
example,
mean,
information being
that's right.
so something to keep.
That's right.
Yeah.
But misused. But I think I guess what I would be excited about if I was a CMO, or if I was a smart one, is to not think about how many people can be fired, but to think about how many of the actual the capabilities, maybe the 5 years ago capabilities of the platform, that they could now actually have the personnel bandwidth to try to use. Whereas before, you're just on the bare bleeding, you're just the bare minimum of like, okay, we have at least the right sizes of graphic uploaded here, and we've got graphics for every product, and we've got, we don't have typos all over the place, or whatever. They basically just the bare minimum of running a CMS, and you're not saying, well, are you automatically, how are you changing your experiences for new versus returning customers? And are you giving a different experience for these different age groups? Are you giving a different experience for West Coast, West Coast versus East Coast, or Florida versus Minneapolis, sort of a thing? Like they're like, oh yeah, no, we're not even there. That'd be great to go there, but we're not there. Obviously, with a little bit of AI assistance, then you could get out of that a bit, and have, I mean, between the AI assisted writing, or just things like AI assisted translations. A lot of companies would love to be. They do actually have publics in all kinds of different countries, and they're selling all over the world. And yeah, their corporate website is still in English, and it's only in English, and maybe English and Spanish or something like that. And the Spanish one's different because they just haven't gotten around to translating it.
Right.
If they had some help there.
Right. And I think, it could potentially be more automated now too. So with the translation workflows that typically happen, you have to have somebody, an actual human, who does those translations because they have to be aware of things that are culturally appropriate, for example.
Right.
Now, can AI do something like that? That's pretty interesting too. That would be a very interesting use case to see that a little bit more automated.
Yep, that's right. Because at that point too, you're not talking about, hey Google, or hey Bing or whatever, write my resume cover letter for me so that I get hired. You know what I mean? You're not trying to have it do generative AI like that. You're just trying to just say, give me the right phrase for more help, click here, or something like that. You know what I mean? And it's and you see it's this long in German and it was this long in Dutch. Like, do you need all those words? Like, is that right?
Well, it's because in German it's all one word, right?
So
yeah.
Yeah.
So as far as AI, so I think there's a couple of organizations that have been using AI already, AI and machine learning, right? So Adobe, I know they have Adobe Sensei, and I've seen that being used in things like their digital asset management tool. I'm curious to see where some of the other big players out there are going to be using it as well, and does that come into a factor when somebody's choosing a DXP as well?
Right, exactly. Because obviously, you've used Creative Suite or Creative Cloud for lots of things. I mean, there's amazing uses of Sensei that are already there for things like content aware erasing and things like that, or these remix things in Premiere Pro where you can say, I've got these cuts and here's my music, cut it so that when the big hit comes in the techno, that the guy is going off of the jump or something like that, and it does it for you, stuff like that.
Yeah.
But obviously, with it, sorry, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say the AI that I've been using in that Creative Suite, specifically in Lightroom, right? So the latest version that I'm working in, and this is a sort of a side project that I did recently. I created a bunch of corporate headshots for people, right? So what the Lightroom application did for me is that it automatically selected the people's eyes, their teeth. It whitened them automatically. It enhanced their eyes, it smoothed their hair. It did all these different things that normally I would have manually had to do, and it just did it for me. It was fantastic. So that really improved the workflow. So I'm pretty excited to see, where in things of content management world, what are the next things that we're going to be seeing here. Maybe not necessarily content writing itself, but at least it being optimized, for example. I think that'd be fantastic. Those are some great next steps, I'd say.
Right. Yeah. Well, but that's where you get into also where that feeds into your asset management platform, is because you take something that's a personal project like me making family mountain biking videos and you with all of your amazing photography.
Thank you.
But you take that same it's really good. I should have used your photographs for the background here. But you take something like Photoshop, right? Where you've got something that's super labor intensive. Like, okay, let's say you've got product shots. The product, let's say you got a sneaker and you got a box and something, right? So you got words that are on something and the words got to be replaced. You can do all that in Photoshop, and you can do that in Photoshop. But you could probably script a Photoshop action to do it on somebody's desktop or something like that. Then okay, fine. Then doing Photoshop actions on somebody's desktop, that's not the cloud. But now Photoshop is in the cloud. There's a whole Photoshop API that you could script into Adobe Experience Manager's assets to go and say, good, I'm going to upload this thing. When this PSD goes up, then you're going to go and you just run these sets of actions on it. You're going to go and replace the background here. You're going to do this thing. You're going to put the text here. This translated text goes here with a drop shadow, and good, turn it around, and then save these images out on it. It's like that sort of thing is huge. At that point too, then you're taking a designer and a designer who was previously overworked and some other developer who was previously overworked, and next thing you know, they're turning out work that would have taken a whole team. Like you would have just said, hey, we're only going to do English images. We just don't have the manpower to do anything besides English images. Because a lot of times this is how it shakes out. It's not just, oh, they're going to fire everybody. It's just, there's work in the company that just doesn't get done.
All right.
And sorry, everybody gets English images. Sorry, but now you could actually put localized images with localized descriptions, with even a local background. You have a dancer who's showing off some outfit or something like that. That dancer could be in Portland, Oregon. The dancer could be in Bogota. The dancer could be in Venice. The dancer could be in Johannesburg. You know what I mean? You could just go and flip out the backgrounds, save out all the images, and they go correctly into the right languages in the right folders. So, I
Yeah.
mean, these things would be amazing.
Absolutely. And this is where what comes to mind is things like integrations, because you can have all these different Photoshop actions. You have all this content automation that's happening, this creative automation that's happening. But then can you work in some of those insights as to what's the image that works best? Is the one with a starry background or the one with the sunshine, work better? And does that even vary by location of where it's being delivered and rendered? Right. So taking those kinds of insights and, sort of upping the potential conversions is, I think, a pretty key element there too to consider. So those integration
Right.
things like analytics, right? I think it's pretty important when looking at something like a DXP.
Totally. All right. Well, sum me up where we've gotten so far. So we talked a bunch about asset management, AI features, some of this low code, no code type stuff of being able to have AI write code for you. We talked about who is your existing staff that you already have and factoring that into your decisioning. Do you have the staff? Will you have to hire them? Do you have enough to be able to make the project successful? Will you have enough in the long term, or are they always going to be mercenaries? Is digital asset management a part of it? How big is it in the decision? Do you have lots of them? Do you have only a little bit of assets that you have to worry about? And then also, what are your priorities and what is your presence like? Are you on everything? Do you have multiple apps? Do you have a super curated mobile experience? Do you have multiple mobile experiences? Where you've got you're a hotel chain with multiple apps for each major hotel or something like that. If we are one of these big Las Vegas hotels, you've got a lot of experiences to then care for. Because a lot of these big Las Vegas hotels, you've got an app, you've got maybe three apps, you've got mobile, desktop, and then you've got screens. You got screens all over the hotel that then have to be branded. They have to have up-to-date information and so forth. You have screens in people's rooms. So you have 7,000 screens in a room or something like that. So what is it driving? So that's another thing that we've talked about. One thing I don't know that we've touched on quite enough is to, if you were going into a company asking about, okay, good. So they're saying they want to go and upgrade their or choose a new experience platform. In terms of integrations, what kind of integrations are you concerned with, or do you care about? What ones do you want them to tell you all about?
Right. And I think that is an important one. So integrations with things like a CRM system, or maybe it's your commerce backend.
Right.
Something like the commerce integration framework. We've talked about that, a number of times. And the other thing too that is important are the things like the analytics and targeting. Right. So those are sort of the sort of foundational kinds of integrations, I think.
Right.
But there may be other integrations as well. So that's obviously something to consider. What I like to see in a platform is sort of it's being agnostic. So are they using standard sorts of APIs and authentication systems and tokens and
Right.
that kind of thing in order to make those integrations happen? Is it one way? Is it two way? Sort of synchronization that's happening, or is it something that's a little bit more one way? And is it in batch? Is it done over a 24-hour period? Then I'll see my change. Maybe I want to see things a little bit more real time. So I think those are the kinds of integrations, the different factors behind those integrations that I would like to see.
Yep. Yep. And then also, so you talked about CRM. So there's also the relatively deep subject of forms.
Mm-hmm.
And the different types of structured information that have to come in off of a website and go someplace useful, and how much of that do you have on your public-facing website? And that really that's one of these ones where it can take something that, oh, good, you fit very, very nicely in this box. You can buy this one product, and then suddenly it just all goes to hell because you've got like a bank or something like that, or an insurance company, or somebody who processes home loans, or somebody who processes do you qualify for a 0% whatever this crazy car deal or something like that. There's so many different ways that structured information is going to either have to be in an official form, it's going to have to go to somewhere in particular, and it's going to have to get registered as some deal. It has to be something that is legally signable to that person and come back as a form that can be legally signed, and then that information that was in that form can then go someplace. So all of that sort of thing is a huge part of like what is this supposed to what is the site supposed to do? Like, because in some cases you're just like it's like let me show you the new 6000 SUX, and here's what it looks like, and look at it in the inside, look at the outside. It's all done, right? But in some cases, the person has to really execute a much more complicated transaction, and what systems does it then have to interact with, and that'll change your mind on what kind of system that you can then use.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yeah, and that's one area that I kind of like where Adobe has gone with this too, because Adobe has the Forms add-on that you can have in their Experience Manager offering.
Right.
I had some opportunity to work in that as well, and the way that they treat forms is something as it's authorizable content. So an author can go in there and they can build out these forms for various purposes. They can even make a wizard out of it with the various panels. They can build different behind it, so they can show or hide information based on the entry of another form element, for example. So I really like the direction that they've been going with that, and they do have integrations that you can build out for doing things like pulling information from a service and then having that populated drop down, for example.
Exactly.
Yeah, so that's the kind of thing that it's kind of nice. It's a nice add-on. It doesn't come, I think, out of the box with AEM, but it is something that you can pursue if that's something that your organization does, which is a lot of work in forms, right?
Right. So yeah, so that's a deep subject though, I think, in terms of what sort of actual structured input and output does the system do? Does it do you need to be able to import a list of device specifications that have to be able to be shown, right? Like a public example. This is not a site that I've worked on, but a public example that is running on AEM would be Intel.com. Like if you go and you search Core i7 1280p, you just Google that, right? Comes up with a system that has pulled in a bunch of structured information on Intel processors and tabularizes them and so forth. How do you then keep that up to date? Things like that that's a big deal.
Yeah.
Wow. Okay. Good. Well, there's so it's a lot to go through then. So if you, because then we even talked about actual brands to consider. You know what I mean? Because you know what I mean? So there's and here's another thing that I wanted to make sure we touch on, and this gets back to my sysadmin roots, and this gets more technical, which is so AEM a lot of times is running big brands, big public facing brands. A lot of people use AEM internally, and there's been a lot of intranets. Internal, it's a super dated term, and it makes me seem old when I say it, but a lot of intranets are running AEM, and in a lot of cases you've got sensitive information that goes in those intranets, and sometimes they're intranets and sometimes they're extranets, where you've got it's a 100% logged in experience. It's only available to people who are either authenticated or they're on this particular network, and you can't you want it to be locked down because it's got whatever, like let's just say you're a big shoe company and it's next season's shoe, and if that gets out, then suddenly you've got people who are always trying to find out what next season's shoe looks like, and if it gets out in the world, then now it's not new anymore. Now you got to redesign it so that it's new. So it has to be super locked down. So security requirements like that are kind of a big deal. And there are some systems that if it's from a technical perspective, if they are totally shared tenant, you're relying on how good is this scrappy little company at keeping my data separate from other people's data, and there's no actual physical separation between that, then how confident is your chief security officer and all your other security folks going to be to putting all of this relatively, in some cases, truly sensitive information um, on a shared system, on a completely shared tenancy system that may or may not be able to be completely isolated? Like, can you set me up a thing and it's got a VPN device in front of it, and I'm, maybe I'm in the cloud, but it's my own little section of the cloud, sort of a thing. Or it could be that your chief security people say, sorry, no cloud, no public clouds, no shared stuff for us, no SaaS platforms, because then you have a different set of requirements then of like what platforms are not SaaS, what platforms can you get that I own the whole thing, where I could go through myself. Yes, I can't. You're saying it's PCI compliant or whatever. I don't totally trust you. So what platforms are now available if you have those types of security requirements?
Yeah, no, that's a really good question, and I would probably look at the different compliance levels that these organizations meet, that these vendors meet, to inform my decision on, am I actually going to store it or am I going to keep it with them, right?
Yep.
And also, their reputation, like, do they have any kind of history of, things like, certain security, break-ins, that kind of thing. That's the kind of thing that I would look at as well, when
Yep.
doing something like that. In some cases, it could be that they have to stay on premise. I'm
Yep.
not the security expert necessarily, but I think going to the cloud is obviously, there's a number of benefits to that. And I would think from a DevOps perspective as well, there's some benefits to it because you don't have to physically maintain these systems, right?
Right.
Offload that to the organization that's hosting it, which is, I think, great too. But again, the security concerns, that's something that's obviously important. But then also that could vary by regions as well. I think like certain countries.
That's exactly. Yep. Data residency is a huge problem. So the biggest market for many things in the world is mainland China, which has extremely unique IT requirements. So there are a lot of cloud platforms out there that are just right out. They're just like, so you're doing business in mainland China, you're out. Can't do it. There's some of my favorite analytics platforms you can't use. Like one of the ones, New Relic. I love New Relic. New Relic's awesome. I think, am I still running? Yeah, got a New Relic shirt on. So they're great, but they're not in China because their gear can't run there, so that is another thing that you have to consider of, are you going to sell your stuff to people in mainland China? That really limits your options on what you're going to do, because then you have to have your e-commerce gear that's there. If you're collecting personally identifiable information of Chinese citizens, that law's gray as to, is it possible to store some of that information outside of China? In some cases, it's really not a good idea. You could get blacklisted immediately. So those types of IT, you can't only just go with the new shiny object. You also have to look at some of those really mundane, but could change everything type things of data residency.
Mm-hmm. And I wonder too how that information or how that data can be structured in such a way where some of it resides locally, but some of it can also reside that's cloud-based or
Yep.
Externally hosted, for example. So are there ways to aggregate that content
Yep.
that still meet the requirements that you have with things like security?
Yep. Or do you have to do the really undesirable thing and bifurcate your whole platform and say, everybody else is running on this, China's running on this,
Mm-hmm.
or China and Russia and whatever other place has a specific requirement for where their data goes, that goes on this platform. All the other stuff goes on this platform.
Yeah,
sort of a thing. All right, well, coming up on an hour here, so I think we've at least set the stage for being able to talk through a shootout or a showdown between different experience management platforms.
yeah,
And I think we got to do that at this point. Is make a theoretical showdown of say I'm company A, I'm company B, and what would make me want to choose in a given way, because that's kind of naturally the next step at this point, because we've thought about a lot of things. We basically have set up anybody who's going to go through everything we just talked about to do a whatever, a 10-week discovery just to get through all those questions.
Right. And you know what? I know that the platforms that are out there, they're obviously not all created equal, right?
Right.
Some of them have advantages that the others don't. Um, but in some cases, I think too, you have to look at what are the different technologies that you have internally, right? If you're, an organization that specializes in Java, for example, you're probably not going to want to look at the .NET
Right.
offering, for example, or the PHP-based one. Whereas if you're a .NET shop, then maybe something like Sitecore is going to be more favorable because those are the expertise that you have, and you can make various customizations or build out certain things for your groups that are going to be much less impactful than something like having to learn Java, for example, which is what Adobe has offered, which is what it's based on. So, I think those are some of the considerations too when looking at something like a DXP.
Yeah, yes, indeed. All right. Well, thank you for having this conversation with me. I feel like even if nobody else watches this, then I feel like we re-examining this is always helpful.
Yeah, that's been great for sure.
Well, good. Well, until next time, until round two, then.
Awesome. Thanks.